Catalyzing is that thing that starts a reaction, but doesn't necessarily involve itself in the reaction, just makes it happen, contains it, and drives it. Has always been an idea for me about who and what I wanted to be, how I wanted to interact with other people, how I could get folks to do stuff. When I think about the civil rights movement, that was an entire movement of catalyzing people to do stuff. And so for me, that's how I relate to catalyst, what it means to be a catalyst, getting and driving people to do things that they otherwise would not do.
I'm Shannon Lucas.
And I'm Tracy Lovejoy, and we're the co-CEOs of Catalyst Constellations, which is dedicated to catalyzing innate change makers to accelerate positive change.
This is our podcast,
Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out,
where we highlight catalysts that are creating amazing change in the world. And I'm super excited today to have time with Tyrome Smith. Ty has over 25 years consulting and leading executives and their teams by helping them understand human and organizational dynamics. Currently, he's the Director of Partnership for the Common Mission Project, CMP, whose mission is to create an international network of entrepreneurs driven to solve the critical challenges of our time. Prior to that, he was a senior consultant to the Department of Defense. As a trusted advisor and coach to senior leaders, he's conducted many senior level engagements with the express intention of eliciting a strategic focus on revolutionizing both how value is conceptualized and executed. Much of his early insight into human systems dynamics came from serving as a police officer very early in his professional career, as well as working with adolescents in a therapeutic setting. And because of all of those dots connecting, I'm super excited to have you here today with us, Ty. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I'm excited to have this conversation. It's always cool to kind of tell my story.
Awesome. Well, let's start off with your story with how you relate to the concept of catalyst.
I think I've always been a catalyst. As a matter of fact, I was talking to a young person the other day about entrepreneurship, which is where I'm currently located, and in that particular field. And the thing that I remember as a young person, like 1985, 86, 87, when I flunked out of school, I was one of those guys, took the 6-year route, came back to the same institution, left my major that I walked in, and then found another major that catalyzed my thinking, catalyzed my excitement. And I called myself, without any language of the entrepreneurial thing today, way back then, I called myself an academic entrepreneur, right? Because I was always curious. And so my first introduction to catalyst, beyond being, oh, by the way, I was a chemistry major in undergrad. So catalyzing is that thing that starts a reaction, but doesn't necessarily involve itself in the reaction, just makes it happen, contains it, and drives it. Has always been an idea for me about who and what I wanted to be, how I wanted to interact with other people, how I could get folks to do stuff. When I think about the civil rights movement, that was an entire movement of catalyzing people to do stuff. And so for me, that's how I relate to catalyst, what it means to be a catalyst, getting and driving people to do things that they otherwise would not do.
And I just have to say, you've been catalyzing in some really interesting environments like government, DoD, et cetera. So I'm curious how you see entrepreneurs versus, working within large institutions as a catalyst.
Oh my God. So, there's this thing that says the government's not a business. Copy. I got that. But I spent 15 years, the last 15 years, consulting to a very large DoD agency and trying to get them to think not like a business, but how to create value. Sometimes the language gets in the way of the catalyzing event. Right? Sometimes you have to think about, so how can they consume it so it makes sense? So those folks would say, Ty, you don't get us. We don't sell anything. I'm like, time out. Here's the catalyzing. Time out. Do you create value? Yeah, of course we do. How do you know? Well, they go to Congress and they give us our money and then we continue. Great. So you've just described a fiduciary exchange. Oh yeah. Not big money, but by products going out the door and people saying, thank you, and I like it, and giving you good scores. And so it is tough. It is a bureaucrat. It is a monster by design. But The spirit animal for, and I use that lovingly, the spirit animal for Common Mission Project is Steve Blank, the father of the modern lean startup movement. And his biggest concern is that without speed and urgency, that's what a catalyst does, it creates this energy, right? Provides energy. Without speed and urgency, the democratic experiment that is known as the United States is at risk. And so going in as a consultant, working with these very large bureaucratic organizations and getting them to think in terms of speed and urgency and challenging, right? One of the things we know about catalysts is that in the physical science world, it is part of an experiment. Getting them to understand that you can catalyze your organization and in terms of small experiments is powerful to get people to go, oh, we don't, and literally we can do that. Yeah, you can do that. You have the context, you have the rules, regulations, go and do something, try something different. That's what catalysts do. And so while the United States government is particularly the DoD, is the largest employer in the world with the most complex systems and budgets, there are spaces where this can happen slowly, but it can happen.
Yeah. And I think it's helping people, those small ones are helping people not be afraid. So I'd love to pivot into like, what are you doing now? What's the Common Mission Project and what are you catalyzing today?
So the Common Mission Project is a result of people like Steve Blank, and then there's another gentleman, Pete Newell, saying, is there a way for us to take these Silicon Valley processes, how Silicon Valley, those small, mom and pop, garage, a couple of grungy guys sitting in a garage, trying to solve a problem, right? Because they got catalyzed in their heads, like, hey, there's something going on. How do we make this happen? Trying to solve a problem, tearing it apart, understanding the job to be done, creating small scale experiments, getting to what we call an MVP, a minimal viable product, the thing that kind of sets us to go, as Eric Ries would say, pivot, persevere, or kill, that we just keep moving in the lean startup. Taking those same processes, giving them to students who know nothing about a problem. They don't have to be the expert. They just have to have curiosity and perseverance, and teaching them how to do it along that process. And so Common Mission owns that space. We go to the universities, we teach the faculty how to use certain processes, the business model canvas, experimentation, a flipped classroom, which, oh, by the way, is a very catalyzing experience because, and I'll get back to that, kindergarten through 12th grade, you've been told, sit and write a paper, take a test. This one is, go and learn. Right, which is like a mind F for these folks. They're like, what do I do? Even for the professors, we take them, we give them this catalyzing environment of learning and exploration and testing and risk mitigation. And when I say risk mitigation, not run away from risk, not risk phobic, but risk philic. We take on risk, teaching them how to do that to come up with something. Common Mission Project owns the educational part. We own the methodology. Pause. We don't own it. We curate the methodology. Right. Because we're learning. We are involved in a learning process as well. We curate the methodology, and then we provide it to the universities, and even out of that, we help students who are interested in becoming business owners. They actually want to create a business because something they learned. And we've actually had some successes out of it too.
And remind me, is there a focus on problems related to government that you're curating, or?
Yes, thank you. Traditionally, for the last 6 years, 2016, so 6 years, it's been national security and DoD focused. Mm-hmm. But the world is changing and the world is getting much more complicated. And so it's not just the national security, but there's also national priorities. For instance, for those of you that are listening, if you own or tried to buy a car that was a platform of a computer that had wheels on it when you couldn't get one and the prices spiked because they couldn't get chips, the computer chips, the silicon chips, we're talking about that because that's become a national priority coming out of this current administration to the point where they're assigning dollars to catalyze again, the catalyst word, to catalyze the economy so we can start to do that. So manufacturing is getting big, space is getting big. There's a gentleman, and I think that you would really want to talk to him. His name is Mariba Jah, Dr. Mariba Jah, who is looking at space environmentalism.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of junk up in space, and he's really starting to think about it. So we're starting to think about it. So we're going to try to figure out, how do we get these students that don't have to be technical experts curious about a problem to see if they can solve the problem, catalyze their thinking.
And you had mentioned to me previously that you're also looking at, potential entrepreneurs, historically disenfranchised populations. So how does that play into the work that you're doing?
So personally, I was just tapped on the shoulder to be an entrepreneur in residence at a regional historically Black college university called Bowie State University here in Bowie, Maryland, where I live. And so
congrats. That's awesome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I get to kind of poke the kids and kick them in the shins like, what are you doing? That doesn't make sense. Just because it's cool for you doesn't mean that it can scale. The president over there has made a specific call for entrepreneurship as a part of the mission of the university.
Nice.
Break. In the African American community specifically, there's always been the hustlers, right? My wife is from Chicago, the west side of Chicago, and there was these people, they were called jitney drivers, that would drive, that was pre-Uber, but it wasn't scalable. So they were doing the Uber thing, right? Before Uber was Uber. And she's the same age as I am. We are both born, we're 1960s baby, late 60s babies, right? And so we were born back then. So her entire growing up life, she's had those people. Now her mother who still lives in the west side of Chicago, uses Uber, uses these folks to go and get that. Those, we've not had access to the capital, right?
Right.
And so I am personally focused on trying to find catalyzing the ecology of the venture capital. Just a quick statistic, like less than 2% of all venture capital that was executed in 2021 went to founders, Black and brown founders, less than 2%. I think it's like $250 billion, almost $500 billion in venture capital went out last year. Less than 2% went to Black and brown founders. Not because they're not smart, not because they don't have good ideas, they don't have access. And so how do we catalyze that? That's my personal side. With CMP, we're actually trying to connect the dots, catalyze and connect the dots. That's my job, to connect the dots so the university systems where we find those students get the same accesses to the monies, to the faculty, to the problems as you would find at Stanford or Georgia Tech or James Madison University or Columbia University. These are historically underfunded. My son is looking at school. I have a rising, my oldest son is at North Carolina North Carolina A&T University in Greensboro, an HBCU engineering school, top flight engineering school, right? He's good to go. He loves it. Historically underfunded, historically not seen. My youngest son is now in the process of looking where he wants to go to school. He wants to be a lawyer. We went to a couple of schools to show you how the disparity and how my job now is to catalyze, to do some catalytic work to address this. We went to Hampton University, great school. I mean, historically doing the good work. The endowment, you go on Wikipedia, their endowment is like 250 million. We went to Virginia, University of Virginia, their endowment is 14 billion. Yeah. The disparity is crazy, right?
Yeah.
And so if there aren't folks doing the good catalytic work,
that's right,
they will never get access just by pure numbers, just by who is available to them to be able to do that.
It's a self-reinforcing system. So as you're doing that, how do you what are the challenges in doing that? I mean, I can think of a lot off the top of my head, but maybe the top couple challenges.
So one is introducing people to these systems, right? So if I go and I hit up a major defense contractor or a major IT company, they're interested, especially post George Floyd. There are people saying, we want to help. Cool. But they don't know who to go and contact.
That's right.
I don't know who to go and contact. And then so my job is to figure out who to make those contacts. Just that hurdle in and of itself is huge. Another hurdle is the universities themselves. It is one thing to have a $14 billion endowment, or whatever the number is, a multiple $billion endowment, and which means you have all the processes to take the money, right? Or you can say, you know what? Let's go over here. We're gonna squirrel away a bit of our interests to start this program. But if you have an endowment of 250 million, or some schools, some particularly HBCUs, and oh, by the way, I'm looking at, and this is the third part, the government part of this. It's not just HBCUs, it's also what they are, the Department of Education calls minority serving institutions, and that's defined by the number of students of color that are part of that institution. But I'm going to speak to HBCUs. The universities, when you have an endowment of, you have kids, you have smart kids who want to go there, but your endowment is like $50 million. You're like, do I rob Peter or do I pay Paul?
Right.
And so industry-wise, I now have to go and find the industry and say, you need to fund this, because not every kid, like my kid, chose North Carolina A&T State University. He didn't choose Stanford. He didn't choose MIT. He chose those other schools. When he looked at him like, I went to A&T, I'm good, Dad. I don't need to go. UMBC gave you money, son. They gave you money, but I don't belong there. I belong over here. And so how do we find that money? On the government side, it's, we have this intention, but we need to figure out how to make it happen. And so that's the third part of the system that I'm catalyzing. My hypothesis is that if we have these student teams who are going to be entrepreneurs, that's the work of the Common Mission Project, that if I have a combination of a nonprofit, a for-profit, a university, and a government partner, I can pull those together and catalyze, and I'm not just because I'm on the Catalyst podcast, but really truly catalyze something magical to happen.
Yeah.
That's the wonderful part about catalysts. You never know what's going to happen. You have an intention, but it's not until you actually engage the system that something happens. You're like, well, that was surprising. I didn't realize that was going to happen. I'll take it, right? Hopefully it's good. Most of the time it's good if you're planful, but you can never know. So you have to work and toil the soil.
Yeah. Yeah. I think setting the expectation of, at the very least, we will learn something that will get us closer, one step closer, even if it was like, these are all the things not to do.
Yes.
Right. And just reframing that potential failure and making that a potential clear outcome from the beginning with the participants, so that when and if it happens, you're like, look, I told you that this might happen. Just in the interest of time, I want to move us forward. What are some of the key learnings that you want to share, maybe in like 1 or 2 minutes, as you're doing this work, that you could share with other catalysts who are maybe, I think one of the interesting frames about what you're working on is it's at a systems level.
Yes. I think catalysts have to work systemically. I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking about the chemistry of catalysts. H2O2, hydrogen peroxide, right? It breaks down in the presence of sunlight, right? Becomes hydrogen, it leaves off an oxygen, it becomes water, right? In the presence of sunlight. Sunlight is a system that engages the ingredients. If you only engage at the ingredient level, you'll make change, but it won't impact the way it really could. It won't engage and drive the engine, right? By the way, that was my chemistry from 9th, 8th, 10th grade.
Well done.
Right. And so thank you for help me think about catalyst working at a systems level, because otherwise you'll miss something, right? You'll miss something. That was my learning when I was working inside of the DoD. I had to not just work with all, there was a colleague that talked about on and in, right? I just couldn't be a part of this. I had to think about the larger project that I was working. I think the other thing for Catalyst is don't be afraid, right? You cannot be afraid and be a catalyst. You have to be bold, not stupid, but bold. You have to be focused. Like, what problem am I solving? A colleague of mine, we did a podcast one time, and it was literally called WPAYS. What problem are you solving? Right? Because if you can figure out what problem you're solving, you can figure out what pays. And it was tongue in cheek, right? It was an entrepreneur, lean startup kind of podcast. But you have to figure that out, because if you can hold tight as a catalyst to the problem that you're solving, you don't have to be afraid. You know that you are working on something that is meaningful, right? And then the last thing is be curious. Just like, there's a great book it's on my bookshelf by Hal Gregensen. I think it's Gregensen. He's out of MIT, and he talks about questions are the answers. He encourages people to ask as many questions as you can. When, as a catalyst, you stop asking questions, you are engaging in the reaction.
That's right.
It should be this, it should be that. A catalyst says, what could it be, not what should it be?
Yeah.
Right? That's what 100%. We should be working on, right?
Yeah.
As a catalyst, what could it be? And so you keep asking those questions.
Okay, I love it. Systems level, basically no fear and be curious. I do have one more question. I talk a lot about the emotional labor of catalysts, and that's just in about any single context that you can think of, because what you're doing is you are meeting people where they are in relationship to their relationship to change. And basically, in a sense, holding their hand through the process to make it more comfortable for them. And I think the place that I see the toll and the depth of that emotional labor is in anti-racist work and equity work. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you sustain your energy when that's just omnipresent, I imagine, in the work that you're doing?
Wow. So what you don't know about me, you talked about it in the introduction about who I was, about learning about people. I was a police officer at 18 years old in a town in South Central Pennsylvania, where the entire county, I was the only police officer, except for the state police and one or two officers in the county seat, of a county that had 660,000 people back in 85. I was the only Black police officer.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The only, oh, by the way, it's the Pennsylvania Dutch. I'm from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, right? The only Black police officer. I learned about myself there because even though what you see now seems very extroverted, and I am an extrovert, I love talking to people and love to be engaged. But I had to learn a lot about myself. That's one. I started working with kids, right? Very emotionally disturbed kids when I went to graduate school, that helped me understand how they engaged their world, how they modify and manage their own intrapsychic selves so they can have an interpsychic interaction. I had a wonderful professor who taught me about the milieu of group dynamics at Howard University, where I went for my master's program. For me, what I've learned since then, I belong to the vice president of an organization called the A.K. Rice Institute, and we study social system dynamics, authority, voice, power, leadership. One of the things that when you get to consult in that way is you talk about containment. And the containment of the system and the containment of yourself in the system. And so you can figure out and just like a catalyst does in the reaction, what's me and what's not me. And if I'm all of a sudden feeling crazy, it may not be just me. It might be my reaction, the transfer from the system to me, because I'm containing the system.
Yeah.
But if I can figure that out, if I can make the separation between how I see myself and how the system sees me and the interaction between the two, I'm ready to help. Because I can say, so ask a catalytic question like, so I watched this going on, but I'm confused. And I'm wondering if I'm the only one that's confused. And if I'm not the only one, what does that say about what's going on right now that's leading us away from getting good work done?
Yes. I love that. And I love boundary isn't exactly the right word because it's a, what is that called? Like it's not a strict boundary, right? There's like um, a malleable boundary, and I can't remember the correct like sort of chemist term for it, because you can't completely actually cut yourself off, but like the self-knowledge and the self-awareness.
Yes.
And I think for catalysts, this is where we end in, and this is why we say like a burnt out catalyst creates no change at all. If the system is taking a toll on you, because you won't always have control on that, but what you do have is like, I'm going to exit into nature for a while. I'm going to exit that system and go do what I need to do to recharge and come back.
Yep. You can't be the therapist for the system, but you have to understand that there is a process that would reflect the inside their head, of the people who are involved in the system, their emotional lives, all that stuff gets kicked up because by default, human beings go to the system of origin, their family. By default. By the way, I hate, we're just like a family here, because I'm like, wait a minute, my family screwed up and yours is great. I don't want no parts of it. Not the same. But understanding that the dynamics, people will bring all that stuff up and drop it into the system.
That's right.
And as a catalyst, if you can't manage your own stuff, which is absolutely important to your point, take care of yourself. Because if you get caught up in the process, you are no longer a catalyst, you are part of the reaction.
That's right.
Which could drive it in a way that is not real, that is not useful and not valuable.
100%. Amen. All right. So we're going to have to go really fast because we're over time, because I always love talking to you and we could just talk for hours. Okay. What do you wish your 20-year-old self had known? What piece of advice would you give to people up and coming today?
Don't be afraid and ask a lot of questions.
All right. Same question. Questions. Yes. Next one. What would you say to executives or leaders about finding their catalysts?
They're inside their organization.
Yeah.
Watch the people who go, I don't understand what's going on. Literally pay attention to them. They're not being knuckleheads.
You think there's value for them, or like, what should they be looking for them? What should they be doing with them?
I think that they need to be listening to them. If a person goes and don't shoot them, listen to them. Right? If they go, I'm sorry, I don't understand what's going on. They're the ones that are trying to question. They want to, hopefully, they're not saying, you guys suck. But if they say, I don't understand, you go, so help me understand. That's why those leaders, those executives need to say more about that. Not like, shh.
Totally.
Don't shush them. Understand them.
That's such great advice. And it's so specific. Like, I think most listeners can relate to that person in the room who's brave and bold enough to be like, not quite sure. Yep. What's the worst part about being a catalyst for you?
People say you don't do work. You don't build. I literally have had people, you don't build anything. It's like, I don't need to build anything. You guys build the stuff. As a consultant catalyst, my job is not to build stuff. My job is to make sure that you get pointed towards building. And they'll say you're not useful, but they didn't kick me out either.
It's so true. And I just have to add on for our listeners, because there is definitely even an archetype of catalysts who struggle with the fact that we define catalysts as being action oriented, because that's the feedback they've been told their whole lives. But that shit wouldn't exist if they weren't there precipitating the reaction, connecting the dots, getting the resources, setting the vision, all the things.
Yep, exactly.
What's the best part about being a catalyst?
People go, what does Ty think? What do you think, Ty? I just go like this and I say, well, since you ask, I'm going to tell you, because I ask. I don't have to speak a lot, but when I speak, it is informed. It's hopefully thoughtful. Hopefully it's informed, and hopefully it's useful.
I want to second that. I love talking to you. I know we just had this conversation before. And it's just like, I learn something every time I talk to you. And I have to say, like, I don't get that all the time, Ty. So everyone, if you have some interest in any of the things that we're talking about, you should reach out to Ty.
Please.
Is there just sort of like a final call, effort to action for your listeners that you'd like to share?
Stay curious, stay hungry. It's a play on what I've heard about Steve Jobs. His thing that he would say about stay curious, but I really do think that we need to stay curious, not just about your work life or your enterprise, but also about our world.
Mm-hmm. Big challenges ahead of us for sure.
Absolutely.
I am so, and we are so excited to continue to watch your progress as you catalyze, bringing more diverse entrepreneurs to solve some of the world's biggest problems. So thank for the very meaningful work you do.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure having you.
Same here. Thank you.
To our listeners, thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how to accelerate positive change, go to our website at catalystconstellations.com. And of course, don't forget to check out our book, Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out. And if you have other catalysts in your lives, hit the share button and send the link their way.